Welcome to the Group 7 debate on football. We are going to start with a pro football stance first, so I will share that with you. So some of the things that I think are good about football is that it encourages physical activity. We have a situation in the United States where they're saying that diabetes and obesity are an epidemic, and things that encourage us to get out and be active and promote physical activity are great things, especially for our youth. Another positive thing about football is that it encourages leadership skills. You have these plays that you have to memorize and follow a leader, and the quarterback and coaches and things of that sort. It promotes leadership and responding to authority in a positive manner. One of the things that we were discussing in the debate that we watched in our online viewing this week was they talked about CTE, which is brain trauma, and it talked about the high occurrence of repeated head injuries. And I was looking at statistics for what those actually are. Let me share my screen so you can see those. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen? Yes, you can. Sorry.
I can't. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. Hold on a second.
This must not be your first time doing a debate online.
It is debate-wise, anyways. So I'm looking at the statistics for college head injuries. So this is reports from the year 2000. Well, this is a summary that was done in 2014, but it looks like the data is from 2010. And it's looking at the rates of concussions. So 0 concussions were had by over 80% of male athletes. Only 13% had 1 concussion, and 6% of men had multiple concussions. And this is not just in football. This is in all sports, all college sports in the United States. So down here, we're looking at men's sports, specifically, and football isn't even number 1. So, we're looking at both 72% of people had 0 concussions in wrestling and football, but wrestling outweighed football by 0.4%. More people developed a concussion in the year of 2010. So we're looking at rates that are not, I think it's overblown as to when we were talking about CTE. The amount of people that have multiple concussions are very small.
Good.
And so what I did want to point out was that wrestling and ice hockey and field hockey and sorry. So another website that I went to said that boxing, hockey, wrestling, and then football were the rates that had highest concussions. So if we're going to rule out football, then there's a lot of other sports that we need to also, modify. And football is the one that has the most, protective gear compared to these other sports. I mean, hockey also has a lot of protective gear as well. But I think the focus should be on, making sure that our protective gear is doing its job and upgrading protective gear rather than doing away with the sport in and of itself. So, sorry, you're looking at my whole notes here. So we said it encourages physical activity, leadership skills. We see a lot of in the way of positive, along with leadership skills, you build relationships with the people that are on your team. And so we're seeing that football is a very diverse sport, and we see a lot of positive, diverse cultural role models throughout the sport. I mean, most of you have probably seen the movie Remember the Titans, where football played a crucial role in integrating schools in the South. So desegregating those communities, and football played a crucial role in that, and it still plays a crucial role in developing positive relations within inner city communities and places where you have where you need positive role models, and to be able to not necessarily deal with people of different races, but befriend them and work positively together towards a common goal. And football provides that in those underserved communities. Another thing that goes along with that is it provides college scholarships for people who would not be able to go to college otherwise. So these are people who are the first graduates of college in their families, who would never have been able to dream of college if it weren't for a football scholarship. And it gives adolescents, young teens from high crime areas, an incentive to be good. They can't play on teams and in school if they're on probation. There's higher chance of them being, in a gang-related shooting and developing injuries from that, or even death from that, as opposed to developing a traumatic brain injury from playing football. Another point is that it provides, healthcare provides jobs for, athletic medicine athletes who are treating these injuries and doing a good job of it most of the time. And doctors who need to provide sports physicals and make sure that the individuals are healthy enough for physical activity. And also, when they do get injuries, providing things like the treatments and the bandages and the, painkillers does help the healthcare industry profits. And lastly, I just want to say that football is becoming safer. In the decades that, they first noticed CTE or symptoms of CTE in the 1920s with boxers. So this is not a new occurrence that they're saying, hey, getting hit in the head causes brain injuries. Yeah, we've known that for, almost 100 years now. They knew that in the 1920s with boxers. So, but it wasn't until 2005 that they started saying, it's not just boxers. This is happening with, football and other high impact sports. So, but with those revelations that, hey, this isn't just happening with people who aren't wearing any protective gear, they're saying we need to make the sport safer, and that's true. So having new safeguards can reduce traumatic injury. So it doesn't mean that we need to do away with the sport altogether, but that we can promote safer activities in the sport by having better helmets, by having better equipment, by teaching them, the safe way to take down an opponent in a way that's not going to hurt them. That type of training should be existing in the sport, instead of just saying we need to do away with the sport altogether because it's dangerous.
Right. Good. So I can agree with you on a couple of those points. Obviously, football, I grew up in my family. That's all we did. We watched college football on the weekends. And so that's something I was accustomed to. So I was surprised at myself agreeing with the anti-football, that it's something that we should ban from colleges. And it's not necessarily due to the injuries, because I understand that injuries do occur with sports. That's just the name of the game. So basketball, I played basketball growing up, injuries occur. And seeing the statistics that you showed, I can see that, yes, there aren't a lot of injuries. I mean, you showed and you proved with the statistics from the NCAA that head injuries aren't as prevalent in football, that they're prevalent in other sports such as wrestling where there isn't as much protection. Um, and so kind of what I really want to focus on instead of the going into the head injuries and the things that happen from that is really the financial aspect of it. Because in the whole purpose of the debate is if we should ban college football. And I think, I mean, from the video, there was two stances. There's one for the medical stance and one for the financial stance. And the part that really stuck out to me and made more sense was the financial stance. And I think the reason being is because when it struck me, the purpose of a college, the purpose of going to a college is for academics. Now it's great that the collegiate level with these football games and things, they generate the most revenue. But what was interesting is how much they do spend just to take care of these football players and coaches and the equipment and the facilities that they use. I was doing some studies, and the coach from Maryland, they fired their head football coach who led the season or who led the team with an 8-10 record. They fired him. He was being paid for $2 million, and then paid or like found a new coach, paid him $2 million to come on and coach the team. Paid him $2 million, and at the end of the season, he led the team in a 2-10 record. So they won two games and lost 10. And so, I mean, if you think about it, it just seems like money wasted. I mean, for the university funds these things, but they just lost money. Yeah, it's great activity. You mentioned leadership skills, and I believe wholeheartedly after playing sports that leadership skills do take place on the court, on the field. They do happen, but we don't necessarily need them in college to make that happen. I agree. I think it was with Malcolm in the video. He said that we can have these sports, but we don't necessarily need to integrate them within the collegiate level. Like he said, in the European leagues, what they do is they have specialized schools where kids who perform well in football can go on and perform and play, but it's separated from the collegiate entity. And so I think, honestly, taking it back to expenses, I mean, this one was outstanding. So the University of Oregon spent $4.17 million on a sport facility for its athletes, including the football team. So that's not as that's not as specific to football players, but just to all athletics. 41.7 million just for a sports facility. Now, granted, they are one of the best sport producing universities in the country, but that's an outstanding amount. And so what they could do is fund those for other things. So if you took that $41.7 million, you could obviously fund that into more scholarships, provide more facilities for learning, increase their campus so they can have more students. Because one thing you mentioned is a lot of kids, they don't have the opportunity to go to school. But through sports, they have that opportunity. If you cut back those expenses and use those expenses for something else, whereas to expand the university, more people would be able to go to the university and to have that collegiate experience. And so I definitely believe that. I'm honestly not going to get into the physical portion because I think you proved a good enough point that yes, there are injuries and yes, there are things that do happen, but they're not super, common. But I do believe that we can separate collegiate sports from the university and then obviously put it into something else where it's separated from the university. The university's for academics, and then those sports are very, very sport oriented and get you to play in the professional level in the future. And so honestly, like I said at the beginning, I was really surprised because I'm a big collegiate sport fan, but it made sense. I was like, all this money is just going to these different kind of programs, whereas they could go to different things. And so I think that's honestly a good stance, something that we could do, and then stop overpaying people who aren't being successful, like that coach. Why should someone be paid such an extreme amount of money for performing so poorly? So
I hear you. I'm actually in Maryland, so
No, there you go.
so that was a big thing at the U of M this year, or recently, I guess. But one thing that I want a rebuttal that I wanted to make to the point that you made is that, you know, they're spending so much money on coaches and the players, and I just wanted to show something to say how much revenue does the sport bring into the college by, you know, selling tickets, by concessions, by all these things that go on at the sporting event besides just, you know, paying for the coach and the players. And I wanted to, so I looked at the statistics of that, and this is from the NCAA website as well. And then it says from 2011 to 2012, the NCAA revenue was 871.6 million. And most of that was from the rights to televise these college sports games from Turner and CBS Sports. So they're making a lot more money off of these football games and by having the sports at the colleges than what's going out to the well, obviously not going out to the players, but to the coaches. And I think that there's a lot more going into the schools and more revenue that the schools are generating due to sports than what most people are giving it credit for. I mean,
yeah, and I believe that. I mean, it does generate money, but is that going to generate good students? So, I mean, that's one thing we need to look at. I mean, yeah, it generates. I mean, the university, it's excelling within its revenues, and you can buy a lot more things and you do a lot more things. But how is the student performance? Like, what's happening with the students? Like, does that show like students their grades are increasing? Does it show? I mean, obviously, it shows camaraderie. How do you say that? I don't even know how to say the word.
yeah.
There you go. Like, it creates unity for the school, which is great. But the end goal of the university is to have collegiate graduates who can eventually make a difference. And so
I know there are a lot of sports programs that with the money that or you know, the coaches or the school itself sometimes provides special tutoring facilities specifically for athletes themselves. And they brought that up in the debate that we watched, is that there are specific tutoring facilities just for athletes. You have to be an athlete to participate in that tutoring facility.
Right.
And I think that's because some of that, the revenue that goes into that tutoring facility comes directly from the sports
absolutely
revenue.
well, they earned it. The athletes, they definitely earned that. They definitely earned. I mean, I agree. Like it's not a free ride. A lot of people think, oh, they got a free scholarship. It's definitely not free. They're definitely working their tails off to have that. So I believe that they should have tutors who can help. I mean, that's the least they can do to pay them, right?
Yeah.
To go in and to help them. So I think the facilities, yeah, create the facilities, but it's just, I don't know. And you mentioned something in your beginning argument. You talked about providing jobs with healthcare, and I think those jobs will still be there. I mean, if we separate the entity, if we separate collegiate sport from the university and just have it as its own thing, I mean, people will still be participating within the sport program. It's just a different program separate from the university. Those healthcare jobs are going to continue. They're still going to need, I mean, there's still going to be athletes. There's still going to be jobs for the healthcare field. So in no way do I want to take away jobs, because that wouldn't be economical. And so making sure that we separate, I mean, the nice thing is that there's still jobs, people are still playing their sports, but one is centered on learning and the other is centered on the collegiate sport, where the leadership can happen, where you can get your physical activity and you can get your entertainment. So I think it's all there. It's just separating the two and making sure that, you know, one is for learning, one is for the physical recreation.
Yeah. And a rebuttal to what you had said about bad grades in athletes, there are some studies that prove the opposite, that there's a link between sportsmanship and good grades. And some of that is that, you know, they're requiring these athletes to succeed, and there are minimum grade requirements that a lot of schools require for you to stay on the team. So I mean, a lot of these athletes are working hard in both school and play.
Right.
And I'm looking at an article from this is coming out of England, but it's talking about there's a link between self-esteem in sports players and better performance in the classroom. So just this, there's always been the link between you play sports, you're popular, but that self-esteem that you have from being a sports player translates to being more outgoing in the classroom and performing better in the classroom. And this talks about they surveyed 14 to 18-year-olds, and it shows that competitive sports had a bigger impact on students' grades than joining the debate team or the drama club. So those people who participated in competitive sports did better in school than those who did not. Amongst 14 to 18-year-olds, at least in this study. So yeah, sorry, I'm trying to rebut all your
Well, now I have a rebuttal, but my internet's being so slow, I can't look up the facts. But what my point is, I mean, there have been cases where student athletes have been favored in the classroom, and so what I wanted to look at is to see if there's any statistics or things that can be proven to show, yeah, maybe these collegiate athletes, they come and they get an education, but do they get the actual education? So that's something I would actually be interested to kind of look into.
There have been cheating scandals in the past where, these students are expected to keep a certain GPA. So those tutors who are helping them to cheat in order to get the grades to stay on the team.
Right.
And there have been scandals like that in the past, but they've really started to crack down on those. And so I think that's forcing the student athletes to have more of a focus, and instead of having a social life, because they're popular and on the football team, they're saying, football is important, but schoolwork is important. You got to cut out the social life, which, is maybe depressing, but it's what needs to happen,
Right.
and you can have a focus on both, and the social life can go in order for these college athletes to really succeed.
Yeah, I'm looking at one right now. I mean, there's a professor at Georgia Tech who changed his students' grade in his sociology class to an F, from an F to a C, so that he could play in the bowl game. And so, I mean, that's something that there will be those things. I mean, there will be those discrepancies, and people will see those, and that'll happen. So it's hard to draw the line and see, what is and what's not. And honestly, like it was said in the debate on your case, I mean, it's America, it's freedom, it's, as much as we would like to fight it, everyone's given their agency and they have the right to choose. And as long as they know, and I think one thing that would be good to do is to have them in as a liability to the university, because I was looking at law cases. There's actually a lawsuit. Adrian Arrington, he suffered 5 concussions as a football player at Eastern Illinois University, and he said these effects were so severe he sometimes couldn't recognize his parents. Anyways, after the lawsuit, the federal judges, they would create a $70 million fund for concussion testing and diagnosis of current and former students athletes. $5 million would go toward concussion research. So I mean, it's just, I think, to make sure things are legal and you're not having to go through those things, I think it's, as a liability issue, the college needs to make sure that they promote and say, hey, there are chances where you could receive concussion or brain damage or something of the sort. If so, we're not held liable, to avoid those kind of fines, because now they're spending $70 million just on concussion research, and then $5 million to further the research. And so it's just more money going out the door. And so I think if we were smarter, I'm not sure, maybe there are legal, or there are forms that you sign stating yes, I'm liable for this and that. I wouldn't be surprised if there were, but there's just more money going out the door, and that's coming from an actual football player. So my thing is just I hate watching so much money just go to nothing, and so I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, is this money going towards something, important, something that we can use it for, or is it just going down the drain? Like, where are our funds going? Why, do we need to spend this much for a game? I mean, definitely keep the game. I love football, but does this much need to be spent for entertainment?
Mine is that it's bringing more money into the school than it's taking out of the school. I mean,
Right.
um, you know, the when we watched the video earlier, they were talking about these $1 million salaries, but it was over a 5-year period that these or a 5-season period that these people were or coaches were being paid, that $1 million. So that split that, what was it, $4 million for that one coach that they had mentioned over 5 years,
Right.
and it's still a lot of money. But the ticket sales and what the amount and the rights from the selling the game rights to be show the game on sports networks and concessions and they're filling the seats
Right.
and charging money for those games, and it really is bringing in more revenue to the school than they're paying those coaches.
Right. And what's funny is also at Maryland, where you're from, so they just built the new stadium, right?
I guess I've actually only lived in Maryland for like 3 months, and
Oh,
I
really?
don't. Yeah. So
So
I'm
it
from
was
Washington.
interesting when I was looking this up. They just made a new stadium that cost several $1 million. I'm trying to look. I think it was 27. Yep, this was $27 million to create the stadium. And within the article, it said that they weren't filling the seats, that they had
Oh,
wasted this money, but they hadn't been able to sell enough tickets to max the place out. So yeah, I mean, they definitely make the money, but do they maximize on the profit? Probably not. There's no argument there. That I mean, college sports bring in money. That's a given. And the thing is, the hard thing about this is if we take away football, then the right thing would to be or to do would be to take everything else away, which is
yeah,
hard. And so it's definitely a hard position to take, but it's what's the most economic thing to do. And
right. I
that's
mean, at
that's
BYU Idaho, they just had intramural sports, so you're just playing
right.
recreational with whoever's
Right.
signed up.
And the hard part about and the hard part about BYU Idaho sports is the reason that they stopped having them was mainly because of funding, and the other part is just no one wanted to come to Rexburg.
Right.
It's just in such a weird location that just no one wanted to come conference with us and to play. So it's and I thought about that. That Rexburg, it doesn't have sports, but it's still, but I mean, granted, it's owned by the church, so it's going to be funded no matter what. Is the hard part. And so it is hard to look past those things and to come up with different things that would fund and be such a important revenue building thing
Right.
of the university.
So I think the, you had mentioned that Maryland had paid all this money to build a new stadium. Well, the stadium is going to be used for things like commencement and things like that as well. So if you're needing a facility for things like commencement, you already have that there. You don't have to, rent that
Right.
out and things like that. So if we do away with sports, how is that going to bring money into school to that the expenses that we would need stadiums and other things for are just going to be passed on to the students in the form of higher tuition, which we know is
Right.
already a huge problem.
Which will decrease the amount of students that are coming in. And so I'm wondering if there's any way to connect, like, and I don't know if that's even possible to separate, but at the same time receive funding. So, like BYU University, if they stop playing football and they create it as a separate entity, so it's still known as BYU football, if if the university for just having the name would receive a percentage and to have that brought in as a revenue. Obviously, it wouldn't be as much revenue that they'd be receiving because they're going to need the other revenue to fund the new entity. But it's something to look at, and I wish I could just analyze and see, how much would it take to keep things afloat and be reasonable, and to make sure this other one did well as well.
Yeah, but if you make it a separate entity, there's still, you're not having those scholarships for students. You're not having there's no incentive for players to keep their grades up. It's a separate entity. They can't kick them off the team if their grades are down.
Right.
So I think you're just creating, another situation where students aren't going to be going to people are going to be going into these sports, but they're not trying to get an education. They're not trying to better themselves. They're not going to be learning. They're just saying, well, I had the opportunity to either go the sports route or the school route, and I chose sports.
Right. Well, I thought you said that on the field, though, you're learning leadership, you're learning these character morals and things that are gonna keep you, like they're teaching you something. Obviously, it's not gonna be as much educational, but it's still good things. So
that's true. And I mean, not everyone has to go into an MBA program and get a degree. There's a lot of, physical, they're used to doing physical labor as sports, as athletes. So people who don't, make it into the pros by going into these collegiate affiliated sports that aren't necessarily part of the college now, that, as you said, if they don't make it into the pros, what are their options? They don't have a degree now. That it was separate from that. They decided to go the sports route instead of the education route. They don't have a degree. They're kind of forced to do manual labor. If they are injured, their prospects are even more bleak. I mean, now they don't have an education. They're injured. They can't play sports. They got rejected by the major leagues. I mean, you're creating kind of a impossible situation for them.
Right. Very true. Well, I wish we had someone to phone in and to
Sorry.
First wins. No, I don't know. So, yeah, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
What to say, so.
No, I think, so let's go with our I'm ready for conclusions. I think we've kind of gone and forth with rebuttals for each other's position, and now we can just say, in conclusion, here's our short of it. And so, in conclusion, I believe that football should stay in schools because the rates of multiple concussions are small compared to what goes on in, not necessarily in other sports, but compared to the amount of good that it does to be on the team. I mean, less than 8% are receiving more than one traumatic concussion. And so it would be easier for us to safeguard our players and create safer equipment than that can reduce the traumatic brain injury than it would be to take away the experience of football from these players. There's so many things that football does for you. Leadership skills, physical activity, improving race relations, giving scholarships to underprivileged students, taking adolescents out of situations where they are in a high crime situation. There's going to be less people in gangs, less students in jail, less kids on probation, because they have an incentive to stay out of trouble when they're on the football team. And it's technically good for healthcare profits to have because you have to have a sports physical to clear you for playing. You have to have athletic medicine who's there to treat anything minor that happens on the field or major that happens on the field, unfortunately. But those situations are rare. But you're providing experience through athletic medicine. Those mostly are students who are learning how to treat injuries. So you're providing experience and jobs, and I just think that it's much better to develop new safeguards for these players than it would be to do away with the sport altogether.
Good. Good. In conclusion, I honestly think that we should separate the two entities. I think that honestly, sports should be one entity, and college should be another. College is a place of learning, whereas sports is a place to have a good time, to be honest, to create entertainment. It's just solely entertainment for others, for alumni, for people on the outside. And so I think if there's a way to connect the two, but to keep them separate and to make sure that things are checked and balanced, and that these things, I mean, because honestly, coming from my point of view, I love sports. I played them all growing up. Having a college or a collegiate scholarship to play a sport would be so awesome. But I think if we could separate the two just for the funding processes, to make sure that the college is focused on academic and learning, and the sports are focused on the physical and entertainment, I think we'll be much better off. I think it's the best of both worlds. I think that we still get the entertainment, we still get the learning, the jobs are still there for sports medicine. We're still going to have athletic trainers, and we're still going to have people there who can learn and can do those things. And so I honestly think, I mean, besides the head injuries and so forth, I think that's going to be there. I think players know that that's a liability, and that's something that's going to happen. And so I'm not going to focus too much on that, but I honestly think that what we pay is just an outrageous amount to coaches and to make the facilities happen, even though it does generate a huge amount of revenue for the college. And so I think keep them separate, we're just a little better off.
Okay, so we don't necessarily have anyone to weigh in like we did before, but hopefully we post it on the that'll be, something. I did want to kind of, I was kind of playing devil's advocate, because I felt like, I went into it saying, my mom was against us playing, my brothers playing sports, and my aunt was a nurse and she was against her kids playing sports. So I had a lot of that growing up as far as, well, not necessarily sports, but football in general, So, so I came from a family that was, kind of leery of high contact sports like that. So I understood where they were coming from, and my tendency was to say, yeah, it's not safe. So when I was doing my research, I of course kind of went towards that direction, but then I decided, my opponent's probably going to go towards that direction too, so I should.
Which is funny. I didn't until the debate today. I was pro football college. It's awesome. Love it. Love the aspect of it. Yeah. But after I started hearing, I was like, oh, so it's funny how it actually changed.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to state what I had found when I was researching the opposite side. And so I was looking at things for your side, and some things that I found was like, there's an article called "Violent Sports Promotes Violent Behavior." I'm sure you probably heard of, the Ray Rice earlier this year, who had a domestic encounter with his fiance, and the video from that went viral. He, knocked her out in an elevator and dragged her to his apartment, and that video went viral, saying, you need to, kick him out of football. That's not where it belongs. But when you look at the history of domestic violence among football players, it's staggering. The rates that football players have for domestic violence behavior and other violent forms of behavior compared to your average, Joe. That race. And I also read a statistic that just watching sports, when you're, if you're watching the Super Bowl, the study that I read was actually about soccer in Europe, but that domestic violence encounters went up dramatically right after the guys, the male in the home team had lost a soccer game. So if his team loses, the girl gets it. And that, and so just sports in general can create a
violent behavior. That's something I didn't even think about.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And other things that I had looked at was, I had said that there was, that it brought people of all races together, but there were several studies that talked about how commentators, like sports commentators, treat, when they talk about specific races in football, that they often talked about the intelligence and intellect of the white players, where they talk about the brute strength of the black players, and that there's actually racial bias amongst mediated sports commentators, in a sport where where we argue that it brings the races together, that it's actually something where that's there's underlying currents that's not the case, that white people are being known for their intellectual prowess on the field, where black people are being known for their brute strength on the field, and not necessarily the bright individuals that they are.
Right.
And so and that even showed true in college scouts, when they were writing notes on which players they wanted to recruit. They would talk about the brute strength of the black players, and they would talk about the intellectual capabilities of the white players that they were trying to recruit.
Right.
And it was just, and that was kind of interesting to me to say, this game is where people of all races can come together. Yeah, but they're not being shown the same respect for doing the same job. And so one other thing that I had looked at was, they talk about traumatic brain injury, but another, I guess, common phenomenon in football is painkiller addiction. I mean, in 1996, Brett Favre came out and says, I've been addicted to Vicodin for a long time now. And within the last decade, there's been a lot of retired players who have come out and said, oh yeah, I have a painkiller addiction and I'm seeking treatment for it. Like dozens, like 24 retired players came out within the last year saying that they were seeking rehab for addiction to painkillers from injuries that they had sustained on the field. And so that's something that really needs to also be addressed, in addition to, traumatic brain injuries, is that, we're giving these players chronic physical conditions from injuries and trying to fix it with a pill that's going to keep them addicted forever.
Right. That's
so
cool.
Those were some of the findings that I found while I was doing research against football.
Cool. I liked it. You should have shared those with me beforehand.
That's kind of what I had. And then I had some really good pictures of what a brain looked like with CTE, like advanced stage CTE, and they had brains of people with because there's 4 stages of CTE. So it showed you minute CTE, where people had died with the first stage CTE, and second stage, third stage, and it showed you what the characteristics were of people who were suffering in each stage. Right. And it was really kind of cool. So I want to show that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So let me see. I'm sorry if I'm keeping you here for too long, but okay. Screen. Start share. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna go over to that page now. Let me toggle over there. Here we go. Oh gosh, I don't even have that up, but it was a PBS document. I want to look that up. Okay, here it is. So this talked about CTE, which stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. So, over a long period of time, traumatic brain injury. So it talked about in stage 1, you don't have any symptoms necessarily, but it shows that there's little spots that are building up of this tau protein that forms around the brain's blood vessels, and it can interrupt normal functioning and eventually kill nerve cells. So that's stage 1. Are you seeing this?
Yeah.
Is this visible?
Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, I can see it.
Greg, I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Sorry. Okay, I'll go back to this. So stage 2, the tau spreads, these proteins spread, and it results in rage, impulsivity, depression, are ways that can. In stage 3, you've got confusion and memory loss, and then stage 4 is advanced dementia. So here is a normal brain, and here's a brain with stage 4 CTE. And so I just thought that was a very interesting depiction
visual.
of that.
Yeah, it's a good visual. Well, good.
Okay, stop sharing. Okay.
Good.
Could you hear me when I was saying that?
I could hear and
Okay,
see, so
good.
you're fine. So yeah, it picked up. But
So,
good. Well,
I can't hear you though.
you can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Let's see. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Well, that was just what I wanted to show as far as what CTE really did to a brain. So I will post this video with the links that we used. If you want to, underneath the video, because we're supposed to put in our comments how we developed our what sources we used. So we need at least 3 sources. So if you want to add that after I put the video on, then we can do that way.
Is that all we need to do? Is just state the sources?
Sorry, I still can't hear you. I apologize. There is a chat box though, so if you go to the left-hand side, you can bring up the chat box. Let's see if I can enter it. Okay. Oh, what I had forgot to mention is that they wanted us to go over these 5 things in our thing. So I think this is what we should post below the video, and I'll put that on there. Hold on. So I put, yeah, we need to state our 3 sources so that they know what we use. So there's the 5 things that they wanted us to address. And so when we state our 3 sources, then we'll go over those 5 questions as well. So I'll post the video, and then I'll post below it with my answers to those 5 questions and my sources.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast if you're okay with that, and we'll get it posted soon.